August 13, 2025. In the disputed waters of the South China Sea, a Chinese warship chose confrontation. Beijing's captains barked threats over the radio boasting of sovereignty, while Coast Guard vessels unleashed water cannons on Filipino fishermen. Wooden boats fled before steel giants. The humiliation was raw, the image unforgettable. Simple men chased from their own seas. But facing them was no ordinary ship. The American destroyer USS Higgins, 200 tons of steel and firepower, moved with calm authority. A vessel built not only for war, but for presence. On this day, it would become a stage where restraint, pride, and power collided. At 7:46 a.m., the calm broke. Higgins was conducting a freedom of navigation patrol near Scarborough Shoal. Washington called it law. Beijing called it defiance. Out of the haze, Chinese silhouettes emerged Type 052D destroyers and Type 054A frigates. Predators circling. Within minutes, they closed to less than 500 yards. Over the radio came the demand, "U.S. warship, you are in Chinese waters. Leave immediately or face consequences." Their voices were edged with threat. Chinese ships cut across Higgins's bow wakes, surging dangerously. The message: yield or collide. On Higgins's deck, sailors gripped the rails. Orders were simple: hold course, hold speed. No missiles armed, no guns raised. Discipline against provocation. The urge to retaliate burned, but silence held. One wrong move, one trigger pull, and the world could erupt. Scarborough Shoal reefs, barely above water, had become a fault line between superpowers. The tension was suffocating. At one point, a Chinese frigate cut so close, the gap shrank to just 300 yards. At sea, that is the blink of an eye. A collision could mean fire, flooding, and death. The danger was deliberate. Beijing wanted a reaction. Yet Higgins did not flinch. On its deck sat 96 vertical launch cells, Tomahawks, SM-2s, ESSMs, firepower, enough to erase every hostile contact in minutes. But unleashing that arsenal would not mean victory. It would mean war. And so the burden fell heavy. To endure humiliation in silence was the real test of power. Imagine standing aboard a $2 billion destroyer trained for combat, while enemy captains mocked and maneuvered inches away. Every wave from their wakes, every shouted demand was a cut against pride, against flag. But restraint too is a weapon. Higgins's SPY-1D radar painted the sky and sea, tracking over 200 contacts at once. Every Chinese ship was locked, every plane marked. If the order came, the response would be swift, brutal, decisive. Beijing's flotilla carried the feared YJ-18 supersonic missiles. Yet they knew against Aegis, against America's kill chains in orbit and undersea, they were already targets. In a real fight, they would not last 15 minutes. Still, the Chinese pressed in, not for dominance but for theatre. To capture footage, to show defiance, to claim propaganda victory. Their power was psychological, not military, and America's answer was silence. Higgins cut through the sea steady and unmoved. A destroyer that could incinerate fleets chose not to fire a single shot. Yet the cruelest scene played out elsewhere. At the edges of Scarborough, over 40 Filipino fishing boats tried to work their nets. For them, the sea was livelihood, not battlefield. Then China's Coast Guard came. Sirens wailed, water cannons roared, torrents ripped nets and shattered windows. Wooden hulls weighing barely 20 tons were rammed by cutters 100 times heavier. Radios crackled with insults, trespassers, intruders, vermin. One fisherman later wept. They chased us like animals, like we did not belong in our own waters. Generations had lived off those reefs. That morning, they were scattered and broken. By noon, a dozen boats limped home catches, lost families ruined. International law had already ruled in 2016 these waters are Philippine territory. On paper, the fishermen had rights. In practice, Beijing ruled with steel.
Resistance to the cruise. Resistance to the cruise.
From Higgins Bridge, sailors saw the distant spray. They saw wooden silhouettes fleeing before steel hulls, and they could do nothing. Their orders were restraint, to watch allies humiliated while enduring insults themselves. A destroyer built to defend freedom forced into silence. This was the real picture of the South China Sea, not law, but power. Not fairness, but intimidation. A contest not just for reefs, but for the arteries of global trade. Over $3.5 trillion in goods pass through these waters every year. 60,000 merchant ships, 15 million barrels of oil daily. Whoever controls these lanes controls the economies of Japan, Korea, even the United States. If Beijing normalizes its dominance, it gains the power to choke rivals without firing a shot. To cut supply lines, strangle economies, and wield the sea as a weapon. That is why Scarborough matters. Not for fish, not for rocks, but for the future of global order. For Washington, the stakes are existential. If allies like the Philippines are abandoned, if their fishermen are beaten back alone, then what faith can Tokyo or Seoul place in America's word? Already Chinese state media broadcast each encounter as victory. Every humiliation erodes confidence in American resolve. Yet Higgins's patrol sent another message: America is still there, still present, still willing to put steel in contested waters to show that sea lanes are not for sale. Scarborough has become a symbol, a choice between two worlds, one ruled by law, one by force. The confrontation ended without a shot fired, but the silence was louder than battle. For hours, American sailors endured reckless harassment. They held their ground with discipline sharper than missiles. And in that silence lay the paradox of modern power, to be capable of destruction, yet strong enough to withhold it. Scarborough Shoal is just a reef, yet it has become a mirror of two visions for the 21st century. One where international law shields the weak, one where force decides every outcome. On August 13, 2025, peace held by a thread by the discipline of sailors aboard a single ship. The lesson was stark. Peace is fragile. It survives only when those who can defend it refuse to look away. America's destroyer endured not because it was weak, but because it was strong enough to choose restraint. But patience has limits. And when those limits break, the consequences will not be measured in water cannon spray, but in fire across the sea. If you want the truth behind these confrontations and to witness how fragile peace really is, subscribe now. Stay with us. The next clash may not end in silence.